What if I told you Hollywood's golden age was actually a ruthless censorship dictatorship? Studio moguls acted like mafia bosses, burying movies that threatened their fake illusion. They didn't just ban these films, they tried to erase them from history. Here are 20 dangerous movies old Hollywood desperately tried to bury, but the truth always escapes the grave. Number 20. The Pawnbroker. 1964. The Hays Code was officially dead by 1964, but the cowardly instinct to suppress challenging cinema lived on in studio boardrooms. When director Sidney Lumet made The Pawnbroker, he created a harrowing, jagged portrait of a Holocaust survivor operating a pawn shop in Harlem, numb to the suffering around him. The film was a masterpiece of trauma, but it contained a brief, shocking moment of female nudity during a flashback and a sexual assault scene. The studio, Allied Artists, was absolutely terrified. They had agreed to distribute it, but upon seeing the final cut, the executives demanded the nudity be removed. When Lumet refused, the studio tried to bury the film entirely. They withheld funding for marketing and threatened to shelve it. In several states, local censor boards still held power and immediately banned the film outright. The studio used these local bans as an excuse to limit its release, effectively suppressing it in the American South and Midwest. Allied Artists treated the film like a radioactive liability, distancing themselves from their own product. They wanted to hide the fact that they were associated with a movie that broke the ultimate taboo of visual nudity. Despite critical praise, the studio's deliberate suppression severely damaged its box office potential. It took years for the uncut version to be fully restored and recognized as a landmark of American cinema. The studios proved that even without the Hays Code, their fear of controversy remained a powerful weapon of censorship. Number 19. Peeping Tom. 1960. As the 1960s arrived, the studio system was crumbling, but the instinct to suppress uncomfortable art remained. A legendary British director made a film so psychologically disturbing that his own industry turned on him, united in a conspiracy to end his career and destroy his movie, along with his reputation. Michael Powell, the brilliant director behind The Red Shoes, released Peeping Tom. The film followed a serial killer who filmed his female victims as he murdered them, exploring the dark connection between voyeurism and cinema itself. Critics were absolutely vicious. The British press called it sick, depraved, and an insult to the industry. The American distributors were horrified. They knew the film would face intense censorship and public backlash. Instead of defending it, they did the unthinkable. They buried it. It was pulled from theaters after just a few days. In America, it was heavily cut and relegated to drive-ins as a cheap exploitation flick. The studios and critics actively colluded to destroy Powell's career. He was blacklisted in the UK and completely abandoned in Hollywood. The film was treated as if it carried a disease. No one wanted to touch it. For over 2 decades, Peeping Tom was considered a forgotten disgrace. The coordinated effort to erase it from film history was nearly absolute. It wasn't until the 1970s, when Martin Scorsese and other young directors championed it, that the film was resurrected. The industry had tried to bury it because it held a mirror up to the inherently voyeuristic nature of movie watching, and they didn't like what they saw. Number 18. Island in the Sun. 1957. Hollywood was perfectly fine showing men drinking themselves to death or shooting each other, but the moment someone mentioned interracial romance, the studios completely lost their nerve. The Hays Code strictly forbade showing mixed-race relationships on screen. When a major studio accidentally produced a film that heavily implied one, they went into immediate, desperate damage control mode. 20th Century Fox released Island in the Sun, a lavish tropical drama starring Harry Belafonte, Dorothy Dandridge, and Joan Fontaine. The film featured multiple romantic pairings, but the subplot that caused absolute panic was the implied romance between Belafonte's black character and Joan Fontaine's white character. The Hays Code explicitly stated that miscegenation was forbidden. The studio had shot the scenes with heavy innuendo, lingering looks, touching hands, but no actual kissing. However, the implication was clear, and the South erupted. Segregationists threatened to boycott the studio entirely. Theater owners in southern states refused to show the film, and some even threatened violence. Panicked, Fox executives ordered massive last-minute cuts to remove any hint of romance between the characters. They then tried to bury the controversy by severely limiting the film's promotional material in certain regions, acting as if the romantic subplot didn't exist. They effectively released two different movies, one for the North and one for the South. Fox sacrificed its own narrative to appease racists, actively participating in the erasure of black love stories in mainstream cinema. Number 17. Baby Doll, 1956. As the 1950s progressed, a new wave of filmmakers decided to stop playing nice. They wanted to explore the dark, twisted side of human desire, and they didn't care who they offended. When one legendary director released a highly sexualized drama, the studios united to destroy it permanently. Director Elia Kazan released Baby Doll, based on a script by Tennessee Williams. The film featured a young, sexually repressed married woman whose husband is a pathetic loser, and a rival businessman who openly seduces her. The poster alone, which showed a woman in a baby doll negligee sucking her thumb, was enough to cause a national uproar. The Catholic Legion of Decency declared it morally objectionable, a rare and devastating label that practically guaranteed a box office death sentence. Cardinal Spellman condemned it from the pulpit in New York, instructing Catholics to boycott it. The major studios, who already hated Kazan for his political testimony, used the controversy as an excuse to bury the film. They refused to distribute it through their normal channels, forcing the independent producers to scramble for independent theaters. In many cities, the film was banned entirely, with police physically removing the posters. Time magazine called it perhaps the dirtiest American-made motion picture ever exhibited. The coordinated attack worked. Despite earning several Academy Award nominations, the film was pulled from theaters early and hidden away. Number 16. The Man with the Golden Arm, 1955. Hollywood was perfectly fine showing men drinking themselves to death. But the moment someone mentioned drugs, the studios completely lost their nerve. They treated the subject like it didn't exist, until one brave actor forced them to look at it honestly. Frank Sinatra starred in The Man with the Golden Arm, playing a card dealer who struggles with a severe heroin addiction. The film showed the brutal reality of withdrawal, featuring scenes of Sinatra sweating, screaming, and going through absolute agony in a locked room. The Hays Code explicitly forbade the depiction of illegal drug use. The studio executives were terrified. They begged the director, Otto Preminger, to cut the drug scenes and change the addiction to alcoholism. When Preminger refused, the studio dropped the film. They washed their hands of it entirely, refusing to provide any funding for distribution or marketing. Once again, Preminger released it without the Hays seal. The establishment reacted with swift cruelty. Major theater chains refused to show it. The studios used their immense political power to pressure independent theaters into dropping the bookings. In many states, the film was banned by local censor boards, who claimed it would corrupt the youth. The coordinated effort to bury the film was massive. They didn't want audiences to know that Americans could be heroin addicts. By suppressing the film, the studios actively contributed to the stigma surrounding addiction, all to protect their sanitized version of American life. Number 15. The Moon is Blue, 1953. Moving into the 1950s, the strict Hays Code began to face new challenges from independent producers. The first battle was fought not over violence or crime, but over a single, seemingly innocent word that the entire Hollywood establishment treated like a deadly, corrupting weapon. Director Otto Preminger made The Moon is Blue, a romantic comedy about a young architect and a seductive woman. The film was completely tame by today's standards, featuring no nudity, no violence, and no actual sex. However, the script contained the word virgin. The Hays office absolutely refused to allow the film to be released with that word in the dialogue. They also objected to the word pregnant and the implication of an affair. Preminger, realizing the code was absurd, defied the censors. He released the film without the Hays seal of approval. The studios were furious. They believed Preminger was going to bring the wrath of the government down on Hollywood. Major theater chains, which were still controlled by the old studio system, refused to book the film. It was systematically blacklisted from the best cinemas in America. The Catholic Legion of Decency immediately condemned it, ensuring that millions of Catholics would stay away. The studios tried to bury it through total economic isolation, cutting off its oxygen supply. Despite being a massive hit independently, the establishment treated it like a plague, hoping their unified silence would kill the trend of defying the censors. Number 14. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951. Censorship didn't just affect small, controversial films, it ruined massive cinematic masterpieces. When a legendary playwright's work was adapted for the screen, the studio executives took a razor to it, cutting out its heart and burying the original version from the American public. Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire was a raw, brutal play about rape, mental illness, and explosive sexuality. When Warner Brothers adapted it, they knew the Hays Code would never allow it. Director Elia Kazan was forced to shoot two versions of certain scenes. The original footage featured Marlon Brando and Vivian Leigh in highly sexualized, aggressive encounters that stayed true to the play. However, the censors demanded changes. To appease them, Warner Brothers buried the original cut. They released a sanitized version, where the dialogue was heavily altered to remove references to Blanche's promiscuous past and Stanley's violent sexual nature. The most famous cut was the final scene. In the original, Stella rejects Stanley after learning he raped her sister. In the censored version, she stays with him, completely destroying the moral arc of the story. For decades, the true version of A Streetcar Named Desire was locked in the Warner Brothers vaults. The studio actively suppressed the fact that Kazan's true vision even existed, forcing audiences to watch a butchered, meaningless ending. They prioritized the approval of a handful of moral crusaders over the artistic legacy of one of the greatest plays in American history. Number 13. The African Queen, 1951. If a single word could cause panic, imagine the chaos when a legendary director tried to release a film where the two main characters were clearly having an affair without being married. The moral guardians of Hollywood lost their minds over this seemingly innocent romantic adventure. The African Queen starred Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn as a gruff boat captain and a missionary sister navigating a river in Africa during World War I. It is now considered one of the greatest films ever made, but at the time the Hays Code banned it in several major cities. The problem? The two characters were unmarried, yet they clearly slept together in the boat. The censors also objected to Hepburn's character pouring liquor over Bogart's head, and the general disrespect shown for authority. The studio, knowing they had a masterpiece on their hands, tried to negotiate with censors, but local boards in places like Memphis and Boston outright banned the movie. To avoid a massive scandal, the studio secretly authorized alternate takes. In some markets, they released a sanitized version where the characters merely held hands. The original, intended cut was quietly suppressed in large portions of the country. The studio buried the truth of the film's narrative to appease local prudes. They allowed a fractured, censored version to represent their work, sacrificing artistic integrity for ticket sales. Number 12. Los Olvidados, 1950. Hollywood loved to pretend that poverty and suffering didn't exist in America, especially when it came to marginalized communities. When an international film dared to show the brutal reality of street kids, American distributors treated it like a biological hazard that needed to be contained and silenced. Luis Buñuel returned with Los Olvidados, The Forgotten Ones, a gritty, unflinching look at the lives of impoverished children in the slums of Mexico City. It was violent, depressing, and completely devoid of the Hollywood sentimentality usually applied to children. When American distributors saw it, they were horrified. This did not fit the clean, happy image of youth that Hollywood wanted to promote. The film was denied a standard release in the United States for years. Distributors actively suppressed it, refusing to book it in any mainstream theaters. Some local censor boards banned it outright, claiming it would corrupt teenagers by showing them that crime existed. The studios and distributors worked together to bury it, treating it as an unpleasant foreign disease. They didn't want American audiences to see a film that exposed the failures of capitalism and the brutal reality of poverty. By locking it out of the market, they effectively erased one of the most important films of the 20th century from the view of the American public. It was only after Buñuel won international awards that a tiny art house circuit reluctantly showed it, but the damage was done. Number 11. Beyond the Forest, 1949. Sometimes, a film was buried not by censors or moral outrage, but by a bitter studio executive who hated the star. When a legendary actress delivered a performance that was too dark, the studio boss decided to personally destroy the movie out of pure, unadulterated spite. In 1949, Bette Davis starred in Beyond the Forest, playing a miserable, scheming woman trapped in a small town who has an affair and ultimately dies after an abortion. Davis's character was thoroughly unsympathetic, a rare thing for a female lead at the time. Warner Brothers executive Jack L. Warner absolutely hated the film. He thought it was trashy and complained that Davis looked terrible. When the test audiences reacted poorly, Warner saw his chance. He didn't just pull the film, he actively tried to erase it. He ordered that all promotional materials be destroyed. He refused to let Davis do any press for it. He released it with zero marketing budget, effectively dumping it into theaters to die. Furthermore, Warner Brothers systematically kept the film out of circulation for decades. It was not included in television syndication packages, and it was completely ignored in Warner Brothers' retrospective documentaries. Jack Warner used his corporate power to bury the film simply because he disliked the star and the subject matter. For over 30 years, Beyond the Forest was practically impossible to see. It was a victim of executive spite. Number 10. The Miracle, 1948. Religious outrage wasn't just a thing of the 1930s. In the post-war era, a short film sparked a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court, with the Catholic Church and the entire studio system doing everything in their power to keep it locked away from the world. The Miracle was a 40-minute short film directed by Roberto Rossellini. It told the story of a simple-minded peasant woman who believes she is the Virgin Mary, after being seduced by a wandering shepherd. When she becomes pregnant, the village treats her as a holy vessel. The Catholic Church was furious, declaring the film blasphemous and sacrilegious. In New York City, the Catholic Legion of Decency pressured the local censor board to revoke the film's license. When an independent theater tried to show it anyway, the police shut it down. The distributors fought back, taking the case to the Supreme Court in a landmark First Amendment battle. While the court eventually ruled in favor of the film, the damage was already done. The studio system and local censors had successfully buried it. The controversy was so intense that no major distributor would touch it. It was banned in several states, and the negative was practically locked away. The coordinated effort by religious groups and fearful Hollywood executives ensured that The Miracle remained unseen by the general public for years. Number 9. Scarlet Street, 1945. Film noir was a popular genre, but when a director pushed the genre into deeply immoral territory, the censors reacted with absolute fury. They didn't just want to ban this film, they wanted to ensure the director never worked in mainstream Hollywood ever again. Fritz Lang directed Scarlet Street, a dark noir starring Edward G. Robinson as a pathetic cashier who is manipulated by a femme fatale into stealing money and eventually committing murder. The problem for the Hays Code wasn't just the crime, it was that the villain got away with it. The code strictly mandated that criminals must be punished. When the censors saw the final cut, they were appalled. The film was banned entirely in New York, Milwaukee, and Georgia. The studio Universal panicked. Instead of fighting the bans, they actively participated in burying the film. They refused to appeal the decisions and quietly pulled it from markets where it wasn't technically banned, fearing the controversy would spread. Universal treated Scarlet Street like an embarrassment, hiding it in their catalog. For decades, it was incredibly difficult to find, even on television. The studio deliberately suppressed its existence because it violated their strict moral guidelines. They sacrificed a brilliant piece of cinema to protect the hypocritical illusion that Hollywood only produced stories where good always triumphed. By burying Scarlet Street, the studios ensured that one of Fritz Lang's greatest American films was kept in the shadows. Number 8. The Outlaw, 1943. As the 1930s faded, an eccentric billionaire entered the Hollywood scene, determined to break the rules. He had enough money to ignore the censors, but he quickly learned that even limitless wealth couldn't protect a movie from the coordinated silencing tactics of the old studio machine completely. Howard Hughes was a billionaire playboy who decided to make a Western called The Outlaw, starring Jane Russell. Hughes didn't care about the plot. He wanted to showcase Russell's breasts. He designed a special bra to emphasize her cleavage, and filmed her from highly suggestive angles. The Hays office was appalled. They refused to grant the film a seal of approval, meaning most major theater chains wouldn't show it. Hughes didn't back down. He took the unprecedented step of releasing the movie independently, bypassing the studio system entirely. In response, the establishment did everything in their power to bury him. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the film nationwide. Police in several cities literally shut down the theaters showing it, citing obscenity laws. Hughes fought a legal war in multiple states, but the unified front of censors and studios successfully suppressed the film for years. They refused to let it into mainstream cinemas, treating Hughes like a paranoid outsider. He eventually pulled the film, re-edited it, and tried again, facing the exact same burying tactics. Number 7. Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, 1941. Comedy was supposed to be safe, but one legendary comedian made a film so bizarre and anti-authoritarian that the studio he worked for had no idea how to market it. Their solution wasn't to release it, but to quietly sweep it under the rug. W.C. Fields was a comedic genius, but by 1941, his relationship with Universal Studios was fracturing. He wrote and starred in Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, a surreal, plotless film where he plays himself trying to sell a ridiculous script to a studio executive. The film broke the fourth wall, featured absurd visual gags, and openly mocked the stupidity of movie executives. Universal executives were not amused. They hated the final product, finding it too chaotic and disrespectful to the industry. The Hays office also demanded heavy cuts, objecting to a scene where Fields is chased by a woman who wants to seduce him. Rather than releasing it as Fields intended, Universal buried it. They gave it a limited release with minimal advertising, dumping it into low-end theaters. In the UK, the film was banned entirely for several years because the censors thought Fields' ridiculous behavior would degrade public morality. Universal effectively disowned the movie, refusing to include it in Fields' official film retrospectives. They tried to pretend it didn't exist, terrified that a successful, chaotic comedy would undermine their tightly controlled, formulaic studio system. Number 6. Tarzan and His Mate, 1934. Before the Hays Code was strictly enforced, pre-code Hollywood pushed boundaries that would shock modern audiences. But when MGM pushed too far into explicit sexuality, the studio itself panicked and buried the evidence. Tarzan and His Mate was a massive hit, starring Johnny Weissmuller and Maureen O'Sullivan, but it became infamous for one specific scene, a swimming sequence where O'Sullivan's body double, Josephine McKim, swam completely nude underwater. The Hays office was just beginning to crack down, and this scene sent them into a frenzy. MGM executives, suddenly fearing a massive government crackdown and boycotts from religious groups, scrambled to cover their tracks. They ordered the scene to be cut from all future releases. But they didn't stop there. They actively tried to collect and destroy the original negatives of the uncensored version, treating the footage like a corporate scandal that could ruin them. For over 50 years, the nude swimming sequence was considered a myth, a dirty rumor whispered about by film historians. MGM successfully buried the uncut version, replacing it with a heavily sanitized print where Jane wore a modest swimsuit. The studio deliberately erased their own history of sexual provocation to appease censors. It wasn't until modern home video releases that the uncensored footage was finally rediscovered and restored. MGM's desperate attempt to hide this pre-code scandal proves that studios were always willing to rewrite their own history to look morally pure. Number 5. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, 1932. While Hughes fought over cleavage, other filmmakers were using cinema as a weapon to expose real-world corruption. When a movie threatened to embarrass powerful politicians and industrialists, the studios didn't just ban it. They distanced themselves so fast it was as if the film had never existed. Warner Brothers released I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, based on the true story of Robert E. Burns, a man brutally tortured in a Southern prison labor camp. The film was a scathing indictment of the American justice system, showing guards whipping prisoners and subjecting them to inhumane conditions. The moment it was released, the state of Georgia sued Warner Brothers, demanding the film be banned. The studio executives panicked. They were terrified of being sued into oblivion by Southern politicians and losing access to theater chains in the South. Instead of fighting back, Warner Brothers quietly agreed to suppress the film. They stopped promoting it, pulled it from many Southern theaters, and refused to distribute it in certain states. They essentially buried their own movie to avoid a political fight. Robert E. Burns himself was terrified of being recaptured and went into hiding. For decades, this powerful, award-winning film was incredibly difficult to find. Warner Brothers actively distanced themselves from it in their own corporate histories, pretending it was just a minor project. They sacrificed a groundbreaking piece of social justice cinema at the altar of corporate expediency. Number 4. Freaks, 1932. The 1930s began with a strict moral grip, but some directors pushed back, testing the limits of what audiences could handle. Todd Browning, coming off the massive success of Dracula, decided to make a movie so unsettling that the studio immediately regretted it. In 1932, MGM released Freaks, a horror drama that used actual circus sideshow performers. The film followed a beautiful trapeze artist who marries a dwarf for his inheritance, only to plot his murder. The studio thought they had a controversial hit, but test screenings were a disaster. Audience members fled the theaters, some vomiting in the aisles. The head of MGM, Louis B. Mayer, was furious. He demanded the film be cut from 90 minutes to just 64, removing the most graphic content. But the damage was done. The film was banned in the United Kingdom for 30 years and heavily censored across America. Mayer couldn't legally destroy every copy, so he did the next best thing. He pulled it from circulation entirely, refusing to let it be shown for decades. Freaks effectively ended Browning's mainstream career. Mayer treated the movie like a dark family secret, locking it away in the MGM vaults. It wasn't until the 1960s, during the counterculture movement, that Freaks was rediscovered at a midnight screening in New York. Finally, audiences appreciated it as a masterpiece of empathy, rather than the exploitative nightmare MGM claimed it was. Number 3. Scarface, 1932. While MGM tried to hide physical differences, other studios panicked over the glorification of crime. The early 1930s saw a massive spike in real-world violence, and politicians blamed the movies. Hollywood responded by creating the Hays Code, but before the strict rules took full effect, one film slipped through and terrified the conservative establishment. Howard Hughes produced Scarface in 1932, a brutal gangster film loosely based on Al Capone's life. It featured machine gun massacres, graphic violence, and a protagonist who got rich by breaking the law. The Hays office, Hollywood's moral watchdog, was horrified. They demanded massive cuts, but Hughes refused, arguing that the film actually condemned gangsters by showing their violent deaths. Censor boards across the country outright banned the movie. States like New York and Ohio made it illegal to show. The studio, desperate to avoid government regulation, tried to quietly shelve the project. Hughes fought back, holding secret screenings for critics and manipulating the press. He eventually released it, but added a ridiculous subtitle, The Shame of a Nation, and tacked on a moralizing ending where the hero is executed, just to appease censors. Despite the compromises, the film was still banned in many areas for years. Studios used Scarface as the prime example of why they needed strict self-censorship, effectively using its controversial nature to bury its own legacy. Number 2. Mädchen in Uniform, 1931. As American studios fought over violence, an international film arrived in Los Angeles that attacked the very foundation of Western civilization. It wasn't just controversial, it was an act of cinematic terrorism against polite society, and the local powers reacted with absolute fury. Mädchen in Uniform arrived in America in 1931, telling the story of an orphan girl sent to a strict Prussian boarding school who falls in love with her female teacher. It was beautifully shot, emotionally devastating, and featured an all-female cast. There were no men in the movie at all. American distributors acquired the rights, but had no idea what to do with it. The Hays Code was just beginning to enforce its rules, which explicitly forbade sex perversion, their term for homosexuality. Releasing the film meant risking total box office disaster and boycotts. Instead of taking a stand, the distributors quietly buried it. They gave it incredibly limited releases in art houses, refused to advertise it, and actively discouraged theaters from booking it. In some states, it was banned outright by local censor boards. The studios treated it like a radioactive disease, terrified that audiences would realize movies could openly discuss same-sex love. By withholding it from the mainstream, they effectively erased the first major lesbian film in cinema history from the public consciousness. It took decades of film historian activism to drag this masterpiece out of the vaults. Number 1. L'Âge d'Or, 1930. Attacking religion was one thing, but exploring human sexuality was an entirely different kind of danger. The old studio system relied on a strict fantasy of pure, heterosexual romance. When a French film arrived that shattered this illusion, the American distributors panicked and tried to hide it in the dark forever. In 1930, French director Louis Buñuel brought L'Âge d'Or to America, a surrealist film, co-written with Salvador Dali. It was a blistering, nonsensical attack on the church, the military, and bourgeois morality. It featured scenes of cowboys turning into priests and a woman passionately sucking the toes of a statue. When it premiered in Los Angeles, the reaction was instant and violent. Right-wing religious groups, calling themselves the defenders of the Christian faith, organized protests. They threw ink at the screen, smashed theater windows, and physically attacked moviegoers. The police were called, and the film was immediately pulled from circulation. The distributors, terrified of the backlash and the financial ruin of having their theaters burned down, agreed to bury the film. For decades, L'Âge d'Or was practically impossible to see in the United States. The studio didn't just ban it, they actively suppressed its existence, refusing to distribute prints. It became a phantom movie, spoken of in hushed tones by film students, but unseen by the public for nearly 50 years. The suppression was so thorough that many believed the original negatives had been deliberately destroyed by religious zealots. The golden age of Hollywood wasn't golden at all. It was a graveyard. Studio bosses acted like dictators, burying any art that threatened their fake, sanitized reality. They failed, of course. These 20 movies survived their attempts to erase them. If you think modern cancel culture is bad, remember, Hollywood literally tried to destroy these films to control your mind. Which buried classic shocked you the most? Let us know below.